Okay. So this may seem like ancient history right now, but back in June, when I was actually not involved with the policy committee, but my colleague, Deputy Superintendent Townsend was here, there was work done on several policies that got held over, and now we're bringing these policies to the board for the just had first read. Now we're doing a workshop and wanted to share the changes that were made as a result of that policy discussion. They are relatively few and limited, so we'll go through these fairly quickly. And the members of the committee that are here may want to jump in as we go and add some of your thoughts. I had the benefit of the video, but I wasn't physically there, so you all might want to add some things. So taking first, policy BCC, which is related to employment of relatives. There were two key changes. And first of all, I should say the starting point for each of these was changing anything that was required from a legal point of view. And then beyond that, it was anything else that the committee identified that needed work. So in this case, it's the striking of a paragraph, the second paragraph, removing this clause about regular employees, and that partly came out of the feedback from our lawyer that regular employees didn't really make sense. This clause didn't seem to help or in any way lend to the how strong the policy was or how clear it was. So the committee determined that could just come out. And then there was a conversation in the committee around the definition of family that was at the end. It was outdated and not inclusive enough. And so you'll see a request to add partner, for example. It was very focused on husband, wife, and not inclusive. So that is BCC. Let me pause and see if the committee members had anything you wanted to add about that. Or any questions? Okay, I'm going to move on to policy BEC, executive sessions. There was actually the policy and then the guidance BECE. So there were no recommended changes to BEC. That was seen as fine. But the BECE, executive session law, is a fairly lengthy document that goes into the detail behind what executive session law looks like at the state level. And our legal counsel doesn't think we particularly need this. It's not something that's required to sit in our policy, but the committee felt like it was helpful to have this readily at hand. And so the committee's recommendation was just to retain BECE as well as BEC. Did the committee want to add on that one?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks.
Okay, questions on that?
No questions.
Okay.
I just would never argue with my friends at Drummond Woodsum, so I'm sure it's unimpeachable advice.
Great. Okay, I'll move on to policy BED, which is related to remote participation in school board meetings. Of all of the topics discussed during this committee meeting in June, this is the one that had kind of the most attention and time dedicated. There was an interesting and sort of dynamic exchange around whether people should be or shouldn't be participating remotely in meetings. And ultimately, what the committee looked for and proposed was a more nuanced version of the policy. So it does a few things. If you look at the red lines, you'll see several changes proposed. One is a clarification that the board prefers in-person participation in meetings, in full board meetings, board business meetings. It defines what would be a reason for not being physically present at a board meeting, and those urgent or extenuating circumstances, for example, being ill or having an ill family member, and then specifies that if a board member can't be present for a meeting, that they would make sure to inform the chair in advance. And then the other thing that the committee talked about and wanted represented here was that there's a difference between the board business meetings and the committee meetings, and that needed to be represented because the committee meetings are at this point run entirely virtually, and there was not a desire to move away from that approach. So that is primarily what you see represented in the red line.
Questions from the board on this policy? I would, yeah, go ahead, Board Member Victor.
I have a tiny question. I'm fine with this change. I'm just wondering where we refer to subcommittees. We're really talking about our committees. And so I would just clarify the language. We don't currently really have subcommittees.
Yeah, agreed. And just to follow up on that, so we didn't have a policy in place on this. So this is a brand new policy to the board book. So we're starting from scratch.
Yes.
We did have a policy on this that we created during COVID. And the current policy, yeah, we definitely have a policy in place. And I don't know if it might not be, this policy is somewhere embedded in our policy if it isn't a freestanding policy, but we created it during COVID and changed it in the aftermath to allow what the policy now says, I think is what it says here, but I didn't look carefully at the strikeouts, which is that board members need to be physically present at full meetings of the board unless they're ill or they are out of state or out of the district, out of the city.
Do you think you could look for that?
Sure.
Lots of people, we just haven't been able to find, like I've heard that exists, but I've not been able to find it. So I don't know if it got passed and didn't get implemented, but I do think having a standalone policy makes sense. So I don't know what we want to do.
Yeah.
Well, we can figure that out in between before next week.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I should have clarified that the document there, you see both in board docs. The one that we started with, the full language, was actually the model policy from the state. And then the amended version was with the committee's red lines. But our understanding was that there was not an existing policy. So yeah, we should.
Yeah, I can try and pull it up. It was a big deal because all of our meetings used to be in person. So changing it and then post-COVID, relaxing it again was significant.
Awesome. Yeah, if we could, if you think you could find that in the next day or so, that would be helpful to then be able to bring back for next week. But I'm just curious from other board members and student representatives, like what you think about having, a preference of in-person, but then having, some suggestions there about what would qualify for remote participation.
I think the guidelines around what sort of like allows remote participation to be okay, I mostly agree with that are there. I mean, if you're sick, if you have like some valid reason that you can't get there, I do think that it's important to keep it like that and not let it be like a convenience. I think that's important because I think it's important to meet in person. That's kind of the whole reason that we do this. So I think, yeah, I like how it's written right now.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Board Member Bryden, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Oh, we're in a workshop. Okay. In terms of the level of formality.
Sorry.
Anyway, I think that I think it's important to strike a balance. I do think that in-person participation is really important. I just generally speaking, policies that lean toward showing up in a building in person, I think can be construed by very conscientious people as show up, even if you might be sick. And, I would like to see appropriate levels of nuance to allow for keeping your germs at home, for example, in terms of, sort of like a gray area when people might be, oh, well, I really should try and get in there, and making it clear to folks that they don't need to tip the scales in that direction. The other thing that I think would be important to include if we could is remote participation looks like meaningful participation. And which is not to say that I think that that has been a problem, but just for the future, making sure that remote participation, meets certain criteria for engagement for those participants.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the board?
Yes,
Yes. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
I think you've been doing a great job trying to find the raised hands from, I hate being here and not there. And I think because of all the nuances and important language that one gets that is unspoken from being in the presence. I also, don't like being out here watching. I don't like seeing empty spaces. It looks like even though we're away, we're not participating and that we don't care about it. And, because these are videoed and watched at other times. So I think what Member Bryden said about, engagement and all, it's really hard if you're away to do it. And I'll be away next week as well, I believe. And so this is not, I'm trying to participate, but it doesn't feel right. So that's my 2 cents or 3 cents.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Okay. It does sound like that there's probably a couple of amendments in there somewhere. Do people want to bring their amendment to next week? How do we want to do this? So I heard some definition of what remote engagement looks like and suggested language about illness. Those are the only two potential changes that I heard. Right? Anything else? Yeah. Okay. Sarah Biden whispered she will draft something. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Board Member Bryden. Okay. I think we're done with this one then. We can move along. Yes, Superintendent Scallon.
Sorry, just a clarity on a process question, just to make sure that we do this in the right sequence. For the amendments that are drafted, Board Member Bryden will bring those to the meeting. They will be reviewed and discussed at the meeting and then incorporated. You do not want Sarah Warren to do any revisions to the policy at this point. People will be reviewing a policy without those revisions until after the amendment. I just want to be clear on the process to make sure that people are reviewing something that looks comprehensive and complete.
Yeah.
And not sort of Frankenstein.
Yes. So I think usually when we have 2 weeks in between, we would get that amendment to the board before the meeting. I don't know, Sarah, what your turnaround could be on that.
I could have something by the weekend. And then I can send it to you, Chair. I could send it to Dr. Warren. Either way, I copy you both.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then also, sorry, the Board Member Figdor did bring up making sure that we change subcommittee to committee. So
on it.
Great. So those 3 things. So you'll send the amendment and then we'll get that into board docs before next week. We could still make amendments or changes next week at the second read if necessary. Yeah, Board Member
And
Figdor.
just noting there's some comments in the policies, and so we should clean those up. So,
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. That feel clear? Great. All right, Sarah.
Great.
Sarah Warren, we're ready for the next one.
All right. Policy BEDD, which is the rules of order. And this was a very simple one based on the advice of legal counsel that we take out the phrase or the sentence, the role of the parliamentarian shall be advisory only, because parliamentarian didn't seem to be a role that we were using here. So that's all that was about.
Goodness, we don't have a parliamentarian. Any questions from the board on this policy? And just check Zoom. Okay, I see none.
Okay, so moving on. Policy BHE, use of email and other electronic communications. There were no updates recommended to this one, and we were advised that this doesn't even require a board vote, that we could just mark it as reviewed. But I leave it to the board as to whether you want to take it to vote next week.
Okay, any questions or thoughts about this policy? I think since we are voting on so many, I don't think it is, I think we should just go ahead and vote on it with the batch, just to indicate that everybody has reviewed it and no changes were made.
Great.
Great. Okay. Did we get through them all?
That's it.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for walking us through all of those.
Thank you.
And Board Member Bryden will be in touch with that amendment.
Great.
And I think we did it, guys.
Wonderful.
It's all done.